Today on For What It's Nerd, we are going to discuss the end of Daredevil Born Again Season 2. And there's a lot of controversy around this show, I think, and largely that it doesn't compare to the Netflix show. And we're going to dive into that, but we're also going to kind of look at why I found the ending of this season a little bit deflating and why I think it's actually a good show overall, but there are some things that I think they could do better. So let's start with the fact that this show is not the Netflix show. And what I mean by that is fundamentally it's not. You know, when you have a different creative team, you have a different sort of overhead on it. There's going to be different people involved and there's going to be a different show made. Yes, they're intending to include the Netflix show in that continuity, and the Netflix show being part of that continuity means that you've got to always reference back to that. And I think part of that means that this show suffers essentially what happens with any show that gets to a fifth season in a sense, is that, how do I put it? A first season of a show is very accessible. A second season, somewhat. A third season, less. And then, of course, 4 and 5, even more so. If this show had started fresh as a new show, as in like totally unrelated to the Netflix show, and it was a different Daredevil and stuff, it would have been different. I think you'd have found that you'd probably have a higher rating across the board because more people would have got into this show because it was separate from everything else. You'd have had people who came in with interest of Daredevil or interest tangentially because they watched the Daredevil film back in the day, or maybe they watched the original Netflix show, but they wanted a fresh start. They didn't keep up with it. Or they didn't like the Netflix show and then they came in. So there would have been a whole different slew of fans. But really, this show is full of the fans of the original Daredevil show. Because if not for them, who would it be for? Because, you know, anyone who didn't pick up the show that was a Marvel fan before would never watch this anyway. And then anyone who was who wasn't a Marvel fan, who didn't come in, weren't then going to come in for the 4th, 5th season, essentially. So what I'm trying to say is that fundamentally wanting the continuity to continue to be the same continuity was the first, I don't want to use the word death now, but similar, the first problem that this show is always going to face. I think personally that it matters more to have that continuity if you're going to have the same actor come in, obviously Charlie Cox, and then Kingpin, of course, Vincent D'Onofrio. And then obviously as we went through that, we found that they were going to keep more and more actors. And so you have to keep that continuity going because it's going to get even more confusing otherwise. But from a logical business standpoint, you can understand why they were going to reboot it in the first instance. Now, could there be a good version of a show that was a reboot? Potentially. I'd argue you probably wanted to have a whole different cast if you were going to do that. But with the cast that they've got, I think this is the best scenario. I think this is the best version of this show. Now, regardless of what you think of the plot, you have to understand that that is the case. You have to understand that Daredevil Born Again Season 2 is actually Daredevil Season 5. And so with that comes the ratings that you'd expect of a fifth season of a TV show. And as well as that, it comes with the baggage of that. You know, there's certain storylines you can't do. There's certain characters you can't utilize the way you want to. There's certain things that can't be messed with. So in that, you know, way of things being, basically, you've asked for this, and we've asked for this. I've asked this too because I wanted this continuity. But there's so many people out there who are complaining about the kind of cameo fest of it all, and that there's not proper writing and there's not proper setup of character, and you've asked for this. You wanted the continuity to continue, and if you expected that they were going to have the continuity continue and not have signal markers of that by bringing back characters like Islet Zarez, Vanessa Fisk, by bringing back Brett Mahoney, by bringing back Deborah Ann Wool's Karen. Obviously, that she wasn't really in the show until they rewrote it. She was talking about dying off screen, like it was kind of meant to be like a whole new reset. You know, Foggy coming back somewhat, and then you know, Wilson Bethel's, like all these characters. Pretty much the whole show is comprised in one way or another of characters coming back, right? So I think what you need to understand is that you asked for them to give you signal markers that this is the same universe. They're doing that. They're bringing back Jessica Jones. They're bringing back Luke Cage. They're implementing plot lines for them going forward, which might or might not include them getting shows again. Who knows? But like that's what that continuity is, and that's what Marvel is. Like you're asking them. This is the fascination of Marvel Twitter and Marvel media, like Marvel social media in general. Is on one hand you're asking them not to do that, but then also there's so many complaints as well that Spider-Man didn't show up in the show, and let's talk about that too, of course. Well, first off, that can't happen. It's not the way the deal works, and ultimately it would be a mess to try and get that to work, especially with a movie coming out and stuff that is sensible. Now, do I want Spider-Man to show up in other people's projects where possible and where sensible and where feasible if they're in New York? Yes, we all talked about this with Hawkeye back in the day. We all believe that should have had some sort, and not even like Spider-Man showing up, but just Spider-Man. Everyone thought that the way the show ended, it would have been cool if Spider-Man's jump over New York and like web swinging across New York at the end of the movie would have been great to kind of just be at a pinpoint and say, oh, that's cool, a cameo in the background. That would have been cool. And it would have. But what people wanted with Daredevil wasn't that. People wanted Spider-Man to show up and be fundamentally instrumental in taking down Kingpin. And that's never been the point of Daredevil. Daredevil has always been a grounded show, and Spider-Man is not, in this universe, in other seas, of course, in this universe, a particularly grounded hero. Has incredibly high level tech. He has incredible reach. He has been to other countries doing fighting, and of course, yes, Spider-Man has done that in the comics as well. But this Spider-Man is not your ground level superhero. And whilst they're intending to kind of get to that route a little bit more in the new films, they haven't turned that corner yet. So it would have felt weird to see him just show up in this somewhat more, not brutal, but somewhat more adult, slightly. Sure. It wouldn't have necessarily meshed with the Spider-Man we know in this universe as up to now. That's why it's better when Daredevil showed up in the last movie, for example, because Daredevil transitions better down over, like he did in She-Hulk, than those transitioning up over into Daredevil. She-Hulk showing up would have been jarring as well. Now, them interacting in She-Hulk's show was great because you kind of could mess with that a little bit. You could sort of you could imply things with that without making it like too like weird. But if She-Hulk showed up fighting Kingpin, like that fight's over. Same with Spider-Man, by the way. So you've got to measure up expectation. And one thing we are forgetting as well is Spider-Man shows up in a single episode of Daredevil. It's no longer the Daredevil show. It's Daredevil supports Spider-Man show, and we don't want that. You guys really don't actually want that, because that's exactly what you've just talked about with all the cameos and the superficiality. Spider-Man shows up, and it just ruins the Daredevil, the through line of the Daredevil show. It's no longer the continuity that you want, because what you're doing is you're basically elevating Daredevil out of the street level stuff into the higher mid-tier stuff, and because of that, it's never going to feel the same again. It will feel more Disney-fied, if you want to put it that way, or MCU-ified, and that's what people didn't like about the first two seasons. So think about what you're asking for before you do it. You know, the comics are not always going to be best adapted on screen, and yes, Spider-Man is a Kingpin adversary, and also yes, you have Daredevil and Spider-Man teaming up and quite good friends in the comics, and I think there's ways of making that appearance happen on screen the other way around, like a la the Punisher showing up. Sorry, the way I said that was not the best. Punisher showing up in Brand New Day, and I think there's room for other things like that, but or like a special where you have them working together. You kind of call it like for example, if they did a Defenders thing, or they did like a New York storyline that was like on a larger on like a different scale. I don't know how it would look, but then fair enough. But I think Daredevil's show should be Daredevil's, not Daredevil and then have a Spider-Man episode. So that's my thoughts on that. I want to talk also about the leaks and the ending of this season. And I think what I want to say is that I think that this ending was already very much. And if you guys watched last episode, I said this about Maul as well, because we know where Maul's trajectory as a character is going, so it's predictable. I think the opposite is true here, in that we have such a good understanding of these characters now. We knew where this season was going because of that. Does that make sense? It's the opposite of Maul's. Maul's was mapped out because you know where Darth Maul is going because we've seen the end. The opposite is true here, in that we can predict the end because we know these characters so succinctly, so clearly. And I think that's what the problem is with this season for me, is it didn't shock me. Is that a bad thing? And again, I said this similarly with Maul. Did it shock me? No. But did I enjoy it? Yes. And obviously there's still shocking elements within it. The Kingpin fight in the hallway was a nice, almost twisted version of the usual Daredevil hallway fighting scene. And seeing him kind of unleash that rage is obviously, that is new. But we knew that was kind of coming as soon as Vanessa died in the season. And of course, we knew where that was kind of trailing off to next, so to speak. So I think my opinion is that the show was already somewhat predictable in the way it was going. And then, there's already leaks from season 3 as regards the set. We see Kingpin back as some kind of hobo-esque Kingpin. We see Heather in the Lady Muse outfit. We've seen Mike Coulter. We've seen Jessica Jones and Danny Rand obviously showing up for season 3, which means that, you know, there's going to be a more of a Defenders angle for season 3, which is cool. Obviously, we're all excited for that. But that being taken away too removed some excitement for the finale, especially because Mike Coulter then posted on social media showing off him, Deborah Ann Waller, and Charlie Cox in the prison scenario that happens at the end of the season. Charlie Cox is in his prison outfit, and so that ruined the ultimate ending. And we could all kind of start to piece together between what the show had told us and what that image told us was happening. And so essentially the whole wind was just taken out the end of the show. Between the show being somewhat predictable or somewhat expectable, is that a word? It hit expectation, but it didn't really do anything crazy with that, is what I'm trying to say. And then, of course, as well as that, you've got these kind of leaks and kind of faux pas, let's say, that really kind of just undermined, sadly, the hype of the season. The beginning of the season, you didn't know quite what was going to happen. The middle of the season, everyone was talking about, is Vanessa dead? Is she not? And then they did the kind of the twist with that. And then the ending of the season, it was like, we know where this is going. We know how this is ending. And it did end like that. Again, not to say that there wasn't good TV within that, and not to say that there wasn't a good interactions. You know, that last interaction between Daredevil and Fisk, and then kind of coming to an amenable terms is very Daredevil. And the idea that Fisk underneath it all is not, yes, he's a villain, and yes, he has his tempers, but he is not an unreasonable man, and he does, in his way, love New York. And so does Daredevil. And so you get to see them play that out, and you get to see this moment of the public rejecting him in a way that has never happened before. And so you see, essentially, Kingpin has always believed that what he has been doing is in the right. He's always been fundamentally on the right side of things. And don't get me wrong, of course, in season 3 of the original Daredevil show, there is the whole thing of him very publicly being on the outs, and of course, there's moments of that throughout. You know, he's been to prison, etc. before, but this is different. This is a trial by the public in a way. You know, you see the trial in which he is incriminated live on TV in front of everyone. You see the fact that he knows who Daredevil is. So all of his posturing goes out the window, because ultimately you're seeing him have declared that he knows about the vigilante problem, etc. And then he has really only used that for his game, because if he knew ultimately who the biggest vigilante in the city that he was after, is he's not disclosed that to the anti-vigilante task force, which is there to do that job. So really, even on that alone, he is not doing his due diligence. And so, of course, it all unravels for both sides, really. I think that's the thing, right? Like, his supporters are going to go, why are you doing this? You didn't tell us all this. And then his non-supporters, of course, are going to be in uproar that he is such a... He has lied so thoroughly and so well to them all, to get what he wants and to hurt people and to manipulate people, etc. So it's a very brutalistic take on the in the ending, and that was good. But again, not wholly unexpected. And I think again that's what I find fascinating about the show. Everyone was saying, "Oh, you want like, well, not everyone, but the kind of promotional material, etc., was saying this show was going to end in a way you might not expect. This season, it's going to be a little bit interesting, a little bit cool." And then it was kind of the wind was all taken out of that. And I think would I have liked to have seen the ending without having had all that social media influence to kind of have that shock of seeing Luke Cage walk in through the door, to see the shock of Mr. Charles taking away a bullseye, to see like all those things that might have been otherwise quite shocking in and of themselves and exciting for season 3, which of course it is still exciting. But would I be more excited? Would I have had more of a reaction to those things? Yes, probably. And I think that's my issue with this season. It's not the actual show itself. It's the poor maintenance on keeping the expectation and the excitation of that high. And I think that's what they need to do better for season 3. And I need to kind of move in a way that's unexpected for season 3, not do the same thing. You know, people are talking a lot about, right, is it time for Kingpin to be put aside? Of course, Kingpin is in season 3. But I'm hoping they do a sidestep, and he's not so much a villain as he is maybe more of a presence. You know, maybe I would be very interested to see Kingpin in a way not dissimilar to season 2 of the original show, in that he's around, but he's not necessarily like. It would be very interesting if he was sort of in some way linked to the Lady Muse storyline, and he would like and treat with Heather and have moments with Heather and maybe Buck, but he's suggesting they don't go down this path and that they stop and they change their ways, not because he thinks that that's morally correct or anything like that, but sort of go down the route of, this is not going to end as you expect it to end. This is only going to end up destroying you. And like maybe he's even from the Buck angle rather than the Heather angle, and he's saying to Buck, get out, don't embrace this culture of vigilantism, because you guys you'll be fucked by it, because you know that Kingpin has always had those strong relationships with his right hand man. With Wesley, of course, he had that. And I think he would be very similar with Buck, and so I think that could be an interesting angle to play that, and so have him only really show up as sort of a Jiminy Cricket kind of character, but in like a distorted way, maybe something like that. That could be interesting. See him more as like an old man Logan style Kingpin, if that makes sense. Someone who's out of the game, someone who has learned from his lessons, but not necessarily in the way that you'd think. It's just that he's saying, you're going to lose everything in this fight. Do you want to do that? And if you do that, be prepared to lose it all. Something like that. I don't know. Something different. Just something different. I'm not saying I'm by no means a writer, and I'm by no means I've never been in a writer room. But I'd like to see something different with Kingpin. I'd like to see Daredevil have to tackle something bigger, something different. Well, not bigger necessarily, but something different. Something maybe that's got a little bit of sinister, a sinister element to it, or not even the hand necessarily, but something else. Just something that isn't that, if that makes sense. And I think that would be something that we missed in season 2, whereas season 1 had it a little bit with Muse in the initial run, and then like season 2 didn't have that. Season 2 was like very much Kingpin, and like I think would have been nicer to see a little bit more of a different set of villains across the show as well, and then have Kingpin be there in some capacity, as he always is, to loom over the whole production, so to speak. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on Daredevil season 2. Again, I did enjoy the show, and I will enjoy, I will enjoy your season 3 as well. But it's about getting a little bit more excited about what's going on in the show, and it's about a little bit more about them trying to have a little bit more of a lid on what's going on, so that the show stays exciting within itself in that way too. Like, the show needs to be exciting, and then you need to maintain the excitement of the show within that. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. That is going to be it for this one, guys. We will be back next week to discuss The Punisher: The Last Kill, which obviously is, again, sort of linked to this universe, and very excited to see how that's going to go. So we will discuss that next week. And yeah, thank you guys as always. I'll see you later. Bye, guys.